You know what's a pretty common conversation kids have during recess? Pokemon. Specifically, who they think is the toughest and coolest Pokemon of them all. Actually, scratch that. People of all ages do this all over the world. It's not just the kids at the schoolyards. It's also hundreds of forum boards and social media sites that have had this discussion in some form or another for almost 3 decades. A discussion with many variations based on the Pokemon generation, or even something as specific as a Pokemon type. Now, you know where I'm going with this. You've no doubt seen the title of the video. Now, this is different from my list of best Pokemon that I did a little while ago. This list of the weakest to strongest Pokemon in Legends Arceus is more from a competitive style mindset. The game doesn't have any player versus player battles, and it doesn't seem like they will be implemented. But I still think this is interesting to talk about. It's generally assumed that at least some of these new Pokemon in variations will certainly be appearances in future core entries of the series, though Arceus is still a pretty different game from something like Sword and Shield. What we realize and learn about some of the Pokemon in the game will be handy to remember in the future in some form or another. Perhaps not too surprising, at the bottom we have Hisuian Electrode. One of the more noteworthy things you'll notice about this new version of Electrode is the typing. Electric and Grass looks pretty interesting, but that also means it's getting quite a few more weaknesses than before. The new resistance to water is welcome, but it doesn't really feel like it's worth the rest of the issues you'll find with this Pokemon in a serious battle. The first thing you may actually think of from a competitive point of view is that this Pokemon has lost what was probably one of its more common uses, a switch-in to counter flying types. Its base stats are identical to the original version of Electrode, which means it at least retains its high speed, but unfortunately that means it also retains the rest of its poor stats. Its all-new Chloroblast move is just a stab, less powerful explosion in a way, which isn't good. Sadly, Hisuian Electrode is a cool idea, but as far as its potential in a future competitive scene, it's a missed opportunity. Our next entry, Wyrdeer, is actually off to a good start, with some pretty solid offensive stats and HP. On top of that, it has good coverage, and access to the ability Intimidate. Clearly, Wyrdeer isn't exactly bad per se, so why so low on this list? Well, it doesn't have anything too great about it outside of what I just mentioned. Its defense isn't exactly that great, and its base speed of 65 is seriously going to hold it back. Its signature move, Psy-Shield Bash, could help with its defensive woes if you can manage to land it without issues. But otherwise, there's not that much else to talk about Wyrdeer. If it had reliable recovery and better speed, it'd be a more interesting choice for the competitive meta. Now, Hisuian Decidueye is a weird one to talk about. This new version of Decidueye comes with the new move, Triple Arrow. But we don't know if this move is going to get the treatment as some of the moves in the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee games. It may not carry over into the core games. If it doesn't, then its best physical fighting attack is Rock Smash. Even with that, it'll still have Spikes, Bulk Up, and Roost. But without a stronger fighting type attack, you may end up feeling like you're using a less viable version of Chestnut. At the very least, it has something for its Grass Stab, which means it's not entirely without decent coverage even if Triple Arrows is gone. That being said, it's hard to say where Hisuian Decidueye would place with Triple Arrows still available. Next is Hisuian Typhlosion, which has some strong offensive potential thanks to having an even higher special attack stat than before. It would have probably had a higher placement, but there's definitely a few issues that you would notice under certain conditions, such as lacking reliable coverage against dark types. It's a shame because it doesn't have much reliable coverage for anything aside from what its stab can do. That mere 84 base physical attack stat hasn't changed, and will also hinder some of Typhlosion's options in battle, and will make you have to rely almost entirely on special stab attacks to get results. This does make it a viable option with Choice Scarf though, just like the regular Typhlosion we all know from previous generations. So perhaps not too much has changed. Alright, for Hisuian Arcanine, right off the bat, we need to address this typing, Fire and Rock. Aesthetically speaking, those two typings sound like a pretty cool combo, but in battle? Defensively? Well, one drop of water is basically a nuclear bomb to the face for this thing. And water moves are hardly uncommon to come across in competitive. Even worse, it only has 80 physical defense, and its base special defense stat of 95 is actually slightly lower than regular Arcanine. It does have a tiny bit more health, but that doesn't really help with its defensive issues. Offensively, however, its solid base physical attack is slightly higher than normal Arcanine at 115. It also gets some coverage with access to Rock Slide, Play Rough, and Wild Charge. So with the right held item, it can function as a surprising enough threat to possibly be a consideration for your team. It's unfortunate typing that's such a defensive problem. This next Pokemon is the new version of Samurott, getting a much needed adjustment to its speed at the cost of a small amount of its other base stats. You'll need to make some adjustments compared to how you'd handle normal Samurott due to its new water dark typing. A high base physical attack means you'll be able to take better advantage of its signature move, Ceaseless Edge. And since its special attack stat is also still pretty high, Dark Pulse also stays relevant as a non-physical stab option. If you can get a good setup with Swords Dance, it can turn into another one of those Pokemon that could catch players totally off guard. Our next entry, Basculegion, ended up being more impressive than I expected. Having adaptability as a water ghost type is pretty awesome, and its 112 physical attack as a male and 100 special attack as a female work incredibly well with that ability. Plus, both genders boast an impressive 120 base health stat, but perhaps not the best defenses. The catch here, pun intended, is that you're more likely to find the female version of Basculegion more viable than the male version, due to the typing in particular. The female version, having a higher special attack stat, is going to get far more use out of its solid ghost type stab moves. And there are always more solid special water moves as opposed to physical kinds. If only Basculegion had a higher speed stat, it could have possibly made the top 10. You know, I'm pretty sure anything with low defense stats that gets caught in our next Pokemon's jaw is probably doomed. Hisuian Avalugg sacrifices some of its already hopeless speed and special stats in order to bolster its physical attack to even greater heights. Now, with 127 attack and 184 defense, the presence of this sting will be enough to shake any unprepared trainer. Even as an ice rock type, that physical defense will allow it to tank its 4 times fighting type weakness and strike back with authority. Strong special attacks are of course its obvious weakness, but as far as physical attacks go, only the strongest of wall breakers of the right typing will be able to step up to the challenge. Perhaps a Heracross using a Choice Scarf and just throwing around close combat. Being a slow Pokemon with access to stab bonuses to Rock Slide and Ice attacks, we could see some players use Hisuian Avalugg in the role that Rhyperior holds, which utilizes the weakness policy item and Trick Room. Yet another strange Pokemon to talk about is Overqwil. It replaces Qwilfish's water typing with Dark, and its base physical attack is pretty high, but it doesn't have a strong physical Dark type move, which is seriously a shame. But the weird part is, its previous form, the Hisuian Qwilfish, is probably better. It has the same speed as Overqwil, but it gets to take advantage of the held item Eviolite, which produces a defensive edge by giving it a 50% physical and special defensive boost. There has already been tons of discussion about this, with the heavy consensus being that Hisuian Qwilfish will be the better option over its own evolution. So, in a way, maybe this spot is really for Hisuian Qwilfish. And as Porygon 2 have shown us, it's plenty viable to run the Eviolite to major success. Braviary comes up next on our ranking, and it got a big special attack boost to complement its new Psychic typing with this regional variant it got. That sheer force ability is still in play, and moves like Mystical Fire, Psychic, and Hurricane will make this Pokemon pretty frustrating for your opponents that aren't running some sort of special wall. I mean, sheer force and Life Orb is a crazy combination as we've come to learn, and Nidoking has proved that special attackers are more than happy to get into the party. It also has decent bulk to go along with Roost, so recovery is on the table for Braviary. If only it had better base speed. Hisuian Braviary would really be flat out terrifying and probably higher up on this list. Coming up next, we have Hisuian Zoroark, which is stated to retain its illusion ability. And this all-new Ghost normal typing is crazy. That base 110 speed is also really great, but Zoroark's initial bluff still needs to work to get the most out of its build. If there's one thing that's an issue, it's that it may end up relying a bit too much on its Choice Scarf strategies to live up to the hype. It's got Shadow Claw, Shadow Sneak, and Bitter Malice, which are all really good stab moves. It can be a mixed attacker, but that special attack is a lot nicer than the physical one, even with both being good. Quite frankly, it definitely feels like Hisui ended up with the better version of Zoroark. If this thing really does make it to the other games, I'm really interested in seeing how it's utilized by competitive players. This next Pokemon has immense bulk and a great moveset, which makes it an easy one to put so high up on this list. Guys, it's Ursaluna. I mean, high horsepower, play rough, rock slide, bulk up. We get a lot of move options to think about here. The bulletproof ability is also great to go with its normal typing. And the other ability it can have, Guts. Did I mention Ursaluna has 140 base attack to go with that? You'd think that Ursaluna's defensive stats would maybe be very poor to make up for how crazy its health and attack stats are, but they're also fairly respectable. Even outside of just looking at the competitive meta, Ursaluna is just a really fun Pokemon to use, on top of being very rewarding for how convoluted it was for some players to figure out its evolution method. I could see people wanting to put this even higher just because of how intimidating this thing's whole package is. The new rock bug type in town is Kleavor, and it makes its presence felt with that 135 base physical attack. This new Scyther Evo is a bit more straightforward than some of the other entries on this list. It appears to have the sheer force ability, which will make moves like its rock slide all the more powerful to use against its enemies with that high physical attack. In future games, just imagine Roost and U-turn on this thing. Maybe getting good use out of Stealth Rocks if those mechanics go back to how they were. Like Hisuian Zoroark, it's pretty exciting to think about how some competitive players are going to fit this one in with their teams. So, Goodra's base special defense stat of 150 was always one of its strongest aspects, but its new Hisuian form not only retains that defense, but adds in the incredible Steel typing as well. It becomes even more safe to use against plenty of Pokemon now, removing all the weaknesses it had as a Dragon type. Sure, you're weak to fighting and ground now, but it's not a bad trade-off. Also, on top of that, it has a little more physical defense too, which helps negate those new weaknesses just a little more. It gets great coverage options with moves like Flamethrower, Thunderbolt, and Ice Beam, and strong stab options like Steel Beam and Dragon Pulse. All that power and coverage with a respectable base special attack of 110 will ruin the dreams of many teams. It's easy to see why there are high expectations for this one. With the all-new Hisuian form, we now have a faster version of Lilligant that's far more centered around strong physical offensive options. With a great combo of high speed, attack, and access to the Hustle ability, moves like Close Combat and Leaf Blade are going to be straight up gross. Don't forget about access to moves like Aerial Ace and Poison Jab, which will swat away them pesky bugs and fairy types that think they can stand up to Lilligant. You never know if Victory Dance is slightly tweaked in future games too. It's fairly straightforward like Kleavor, but personally, I'm quite a bit more scared of this new Lilligant variant. You're probably starting to notice a pattern here at the end of the list. The penultimate Pokemon is Sneasler, our second straight fighting type. Legends Arceus out here, introducing yet another fast Pokemon with a high base physical attack stat, being 120 for speed and 130 for attack. There's a bit of overlap here from our last Pokemon, so I'll try not to spend too much time repeating myself. It's got Close Combat and Poison Jab for crazy stab damage, and incredible coverage with Shadow Claw and Aerial Ace. Access to Swords Dance and Drain Punch will end up being a pretty huge deal on top of that. The only thing Sneasler is really missing is priority. But now onto our final Pokemon. And if you've been paying attention, you probably know the last Pokemon is very special. Sneasler though? It's a very special Pokemon in its own right, that's for sure. I imagine that most of you won't find Enamorus being the final pick very surprising. It's a fairy flying type with high speed, high physical attack, and even higher special attack. And that's just in the regular form. Well, that's only if you're using its incarnate form, because as its gross, scary turtle monster Therian form, it's slow, but very bulky. It gets fantastic coverage for its weaknesses with Mystical Fire and Earth Power. Not to mention it can use Draining Kiss on top of that for recovery. Since it also has a high physical attack stat, you can also use Play Rough. But if you want to stick specially, then Moonblast and Springtide Storm aren't that bad. I have to imagine if these Pokemon enter the normal realm of battling that we are used to, that they'd have to redo the way Springtide Storm works, and it could potentially be very beneficial in battle. Oh, and not to mention, being immune to both ground and dragon attacks will have you feeling extra comfortable with having this Pokemon out. There's just very little to complain about with Enamorus, even more so than the previous entries that have made it near the end of this list. And that's it. Our list ranking the weakest to strongest new Pokemon in Legends Arceus. It was actually pretty tough to come up with this order. Most of these new Pokemon are actually usable in some form or another on a competitive team. Of course, once some of these are available in a competitive setting, and in the hands of a large number of players, I'm expecting to see some surprises with how some of these get used. But what do you think? Do you think I ended up underrating or overrating some of these Pokemon? Do you have your own list? Which Pokemon are you most excited to see in the future? I'm always reading all your comments, so lay it on me. Thanks for watching, and be sure to stick around for even more Pokemon Legends Arceus content coming up. Hey guys, thank you for enjoying another Mystic Umbreon video. It's exciting times for the Pokemon franchise, and I look forward to the coming months where it just keeps getting better. If you guys are wanting some more bite-sized Mystic Umbreon content, please check out my TikTok, where I upload daily, as well as the Mystic Umbreon Shorts channel. If y'all enjoyed the video and want to see more content like this, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Be sure to leave a comment too, it really helps us out. I think it's time to wrap this up though. I'm Mystic Umbreon, and I'll see you next time with some more amazing Pokemon content.